First Nations have a right to fish and hunt in their territory, and the right to a livelihood to do that. And the government hasn't listened, and they didn't listen. And when I got up in the debate, we had an emergency debate on this in the House of Commons, and I said it's not lost. It's not lost on the Indigenous people in my communities here in Nanaimo, Ladysmith, and it's not lost on Indigenous people across this country that the contrast between how the police acted in Wet'suwet'en territory and how they acted in Nova Scotia, where they sat back and watched a mob burn a vehicle, throw stones, attack people, in a racist and violent way. It was a terrible situation, and they stood back and they watched. It was the exact opposite of what happened in northern British Columbia. And I said it's not lost on Indigenous people across this country that for 21 years with the Marshall decision, consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments have done nothing about this decision to implement what the Supreme Court has told them to do. They should have had a plan in place. This should have been divided out in a way that everybody knew what was going on. So the non-native fishers knew what the native rights were and what their abilities and treaty gave them to fish. And it's the same situation here. In Nova Scotia, one big, large corporation, Clearwater, has the rights to a lot of that lobster. Big, wealthy corporation. Here in British Columbia, Jimmy Patterson, a billionaire who just made $1.7 billion during this pandemic. During the 6 months of this pandemic, he increased his wealth by $1.7 billion. He owns most of the fishing licenses in this province. He owns BC Packers. He owns Save On Foods. And if you go and buy a salmon from Save On Foods, you just pay Jimmy Patterson 3 times for that fish. And there's something wrong with that picture, that somebody is accumulating so much wealth from the natural environment that we live in that's been treated respectfully by First Nations since time immemorial. And yet, it's Dominus territory. They have to struggle with DFO to be able to get enough of their gooey ducks to feed their own population, because of the licensing that works along the shellfish, the licensing that works along the salmon. We're seeing a collapse in salmon in this province right now because DFO hasn't managed it properly. And we're seeing, clashes and people complaining about First Nations rights. We're seeing a collapse in the herring because DFO hasn't managed it properly. And these big corporations are here just scrounging everything and taking it for themselves. These resources belong to the Indigenous people of this land. Oh. Full stop.
Yes. Yes.
In that debate, my good friend Gord Johns, the honourable member for Courtenay Alberni, as I refer to him in the House of Commons, he put forward a perfectly good motion that said we need to respect these treaties, that we need to act, that we need to make sure that everybody understands what's going on here, and that First Nations, Indigenous people have their right honored, and that the government needs to act. And that motion was voted down. People would not accept that unanimous consent motion. So the last thing I was going to say before I got cut off by the speaker was that it's not lost on people across Canada. We're watching a debate that is nothing but words. Mm-hmm. Just talk. That's what's been going on for 21 years since the Marshall decision, and it's time to act. Yes. Time to act. So thank you for coming out. This, we need to continue to pressure the government to do the right thing, to honor First Nation rights and title and the right to fish and hunt as formerly, as the Treaty of 1854 says for the Nanaimo people right here. The right to fish and hunt as formerly. I'm not going to take any more of your time. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilor Paul. Woo!